So let's just start with why people even came to America. And the reason was because of what was happening in Europe. Religious liberty is fatal to the Catholic Church.
Right now, what Catholicism looks like is not what Catholicism is.
Exactly.
Their type of religious freedom is you have the right to think for yourself as long as it's in harmony with the common good and their teachings.
Right.
If you think outside the box, then you're a heretic.
Right.
You can't have freedom to a person who is against freedom.
Who determines what's truth and what's error? Again,
They do.
Exactly, because they interpret the Bible based upon their tradition and based
Correct.
upon their magisterium.
The real goal of Catholicism is to be the worldwide dominating power over all state, religion, all parts of life, that no one should have any freedom outside of believing in Catholicism.
What do we know about America's secret beginnings? We've been talking in the last 2 episodes about Christian nationalism and how it is shaping into the image of the beast. Today, we're going to dive into the history of America. What shaped it at the beginning? What were the forces that were in place that formed this country into what it is today? With me today is my co-host, Mackenzie Drebbett.
Thank you. Happy to be here again.
And we also are not always going to be just the two of us. Today we have a guest, and it's Jacob Downs, our research assistant.
Thank you, Wendy. This is going to be a fantastic study, and I can't wait to get into it.
Me too.
And as one of our research assistants, Jacob has been putting a lot of this information together, and he was really enjoying it, and he had a lot of good insights. So we thought we'd bring him on to the podcast and get his input into the subject.
Absolutely.
So maybe you can kick us off going right into this information.
Okay, sure. So in the last couple of episodes, we've been going into the rise of Christianity in America. We've looked at the image of the beast forming, how it's fulfilling, or it's in harmony with what we're seeing now is in harmony with Revelation chapter 13. We've also looked at the separation of church and state and some of the misconceptions there. And it's important that when we look at these things that we take a step back, because what we're seeing today is not something that's just been taking place in the past few years. This is something that's been going on for a long time now. And to be very specific, this is something that goes back to America's beginnings. So we really want to look into that and find out what the players were and how all these things fit together.
Absolutely. And before we start, we're going to say a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I just ask that you will please be with us as we now speak about these things. Lord, have it be a blessing to the viewers. And Lord, give us your words that it may exactly convey the truth, Lord, that matters and that is going to be relevant to all those that are watching. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. So we have our first quote here on the screen is Great Controversy, page 292. It was the desire for liberty of conscience that inspired the Pilgrims to brave the perils of the long journey across the sea, to endure the hardships and dangers of the wilderness, and with God's blessing to lay on the shore of America the foundation of a mighty nation.
So let's just start with why people even came to America. And the reason was because of what was happening in Europe. The Bible says that seas represents peoples, nations, tongues, and that was a populated area, and that was Europe. The whole of the Bible really focused on what was happening in Europe for the most part, or in Israel, or in that whole Mediterranean area. And now comes on the scene a new nation in an unpopulated area represented by the earth, and we know about that because we were looking at that in Revelation 13. But these pilgrims who came were trying to escape something. They were trying to escape the tyranny of the Dark Ages. And the papacy had been ruling in Europe for 1260 years,
Yeah.
according to Bible prophecy, from 538 until 1798. And during that period of time, there were a lot of terrible things that happened. People were killed, people were oppressed, people were persecuted, and for various things, including the Sabbath, including baptism, including mass, including many other things as well. And we know about the Waldenses who were persecuted, the Huguenots who were forced out of France and went to South Africa. And so a lot of people were leaving this place, and they wanted a place where they could have freedom of conscience to worship as they wished. And liberty of conscience was very dear to these people.
That's a very important point, because a lot of people don't realize why America was founded the way that it is. It's because they were fleeing religious persecution, because there was a church-state structure where the church was controlling the state and wouldn't allow any other views but the one.
Right.
And this is the main reason why everybody left Europe and went to America.
That's right.
And this is talked about a little bit on our slide here. The population of America began when pilgrims sought refuge from the tyranny of the Papacy in Europe. The first pilgrims landed on the shores of Plymouth in the Mayflower. They were devoutly Christian, and slowly they set up Christian settlements. Sometimes they demonstrated the same bigotry and persecution of the church they had fled. They had not learned from the past, but when the Constitution was founded, the intent was to create freedom of conscience as an inalienable right.
That's right. And this is actually a replica of the Mayflower 2, a picture we took when we were on our trip to New England last year.
And adding to that, if we read the Great Controversy, page 296, paragraph 3, this is speaking of the Pilgrims. It says the Bible was held as the foundation of faith, the source of wisdom, and the charter of liberty. Its principles were diligently taught in the home, in the school, and in the church, and its fruits were manifest in thrift, intelligence, purity, and temperance. One might be for years a dweller in the Puritan settlement and not see a drunkard or hear an oath or meet a beggar. It was demonstrated that the principles of the Bible are the surest safeguards of national greatness. The feeble and isolated colonies grew to a confederation of powerful states, and the world marked with wonder the peace and prosperity of a church without a pope and a state without a king.
So I find a lot of points here really fascinating. It brings out that you can be living in some of these villages for years and you don't see a drunkard, nobody's swearing, you don't see any beggars or homeless people. And this is because of the Christian principles that were in the nation. Now, also, it said a church without a pope.
Yes.
And a state without a king. Mm-hmm. And this is a really important thing, because our shift right now that everybody's talking about, the new king, right?
Yes.
And we need to be in control of the church and the state, or the church needs to be in control of the state. That's exactly opposite of what we're seeing here. And this scenario is like night and day to what we see in America right now.
You're right.
And we think going farther from this is the way to fix it. So I just find that very interesting.
Good point.
And I also think it's fascinating that, like she says here at the opening part, its principles were diligently taught in the home, in the school, and in the church.
Yes.
Now, actually, that's the opposite of what we see today regarding the Christian nationalists and different things like that, because they're not pushing for the Bible to be taught in the home.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe in some instances they want to force things in the school, but
right.
They're wanting to go straight to the government is my point. And they always say, well, we have to get back to what it was like before. But that's not the way it was set up before. They didn't influence the state first. Once you have a godly home and a godly neighborhood and a godly society, then automatically that goes to the government.
Exactly. You
They're
don't
just
need government legislation.
Right. Then you don't need it because everybody's on the same page.
Good point.
Now, if we continue in great controversy, we see, just reading the highlighted part, freedom of religious faith was also granted, every man being permitted to worship God according to the dictates of his own conscience. Very important point. Republicanism and Protestantism became the fundamental principles of the nation.
And those were the two horns of the lamb-like beast. That was the basis.
Exactly. Maranatha, page 193, just, breezing through these. God designed that this country should ever remain free for all people to worship him in accordance with the dictates of conscience.
Yes. Very nice.
Was it God's purpose that America would speak like a dragon?
Never.
Absolutely not. It says right here that it was God's design that this country would ever remain free.
Mm-hmm.
And, we skipped the first sentence, but let's just go to it because it says the Lord has done more for the United States than for any other country upon which the sun shines. That's pretty amazing. So God was really he created this country to be an asylum for those people who were fleeing, who wanted freedom of conscience. And so it did start on very pure principles. And we must always remember that, especially as we move forward into some of the darker parts, that the intent of the United States, no matter what others say, was really as a haven for those that wanted to live according to biblical principles and be free to worship.
Yeah.
And that I think is super important to think about, because many times when we think of this topic, the founding of America, the dark side of this is always dwelt upon. Everybody talks about, the secret societies and the Freemasons and all these players. And yes, that influence is there. We're not saying it's not.
And we're going to talk about it later.
Yes, we'll talk about that later. But there are two sides to this. There's a good side and there's a bad side. Both sides are working for a different object.
Right.
They're both going for a different goal.
Well, whenever God does something, Satan is always there to try to circumvent it or to prevent it or to thwart it, right? Mm-hmm. He's trying to influence and get his hold in there. So the same thing would have happened here. God created this place for the people to be a wonderful country, but Satan has his sights on it and wanted to destroy that.
There were genuine Christians who began America with the idea of it being a republic, not a democracy. And that's a very important point that I think we need to define here, because you'll hear it stated on the news or in books, different ideas. Some people say that America is a democracy, and that's not true. America wasn't founded as a democracy. It was founded as a republic, and there is a difference. They both are representative form of government. They both have aspects of that. The problem is that a republic protects the rights of the minority while a democracy doesn't.
Right.
So a democracy is basically just mob rule.
So whoever, the majority, whatever they want goes.
Right. And there are no protections for the minority. For instance, the protections in this sense would be the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, all those things. But a democracy doesn't have that.
Right.
Yeah. Whatever the majority says, everybody has to go with the rule of the majority. And but the republic is incredible because you have that individual freedom, not just a group, common good sort of freedom. If you can convince the masses, then you can control everyone.
In a democracy.
Yeah. But in a republic, you still have these inalienable rights.
Despite what the masses say, you still have your rights and they cannot cross those.
Yeah.
And that's a very important element, I believe, and that's what makes America great, I do believe. However, despite all these great things that started America, we also know, as I mentioned, there were other entities and other groups who wanted to influence America. And not all of them had good intentions. And this was all, of course, spawned by Satan, and he was in the inspiration behind all these things. But there were more than one.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was Francis Bacon. Now, Francis Bacon, he was an English philosopher and statesman, and supposedly also connected to the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons. And he had an idea that he wanted to build a utopia out of America. Now it was hardly surprising then that he really focused on America, because this was a new world, a new place for him to build his dreams. And
this new Atlantis concept of America.
Yes, yes. And of course, it was heavily influenced by the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons that he was a part of. Now, he authored a book called The New Atlantis. And he wrote in there, the end of our foundation is the knowledge of causes and secret motions of things. Well, that's very cryptic. And the enlarging of the bounds of the human empire to the effecting of all things possible. So he's wanting to expand. There's an expansionism element to this. And he wants to now create basically a golden age out of this new world.
It sounds a lot like what Trump is trying to do with America right now.
Yes.
This whole idea of the golden age and issues like making Canada the 51st state. And then you have Greenland and other ones renaming the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America. This whole idea of expansionism and creating this, we could call it a new Atlantis. We could call it that, because as we see here in this quote, and this is actually quoting from Plato speaking about Atlantis. It says, "Now Atlas," and that was Poseidon's son through Cleito, "had a numerous and honorable family, and they retained the kingdom, the eldest son handing it on to his eldest for many generations. And they had such an amount of wealth as was never before possessed by kings and potentates, and is not likely ever to be again. And they were furnished with everything which they needed, both in the city and country." So this idea of wealth and prosperity, the centralizing of wealth, and creating this environment where prosperity was...
Everybody has what they need.
Right. This peace and safety sort of idea.
I believe there was also some invention that was a part of his plans as well. Creating new technologies, new ways of doing things as well. Now, the Catholics were another group that set their sights on America, and not for good reason. They were not happy at all about the formation of America, because it was the bastion of religious liberty, and they hate religious liberty. We took a look at that in the last episode, but we're going to look at some of that again a little bit more deeper. This is from Pope Leo XIII, our namesake for our current Pope. "For when America was as yet but a newborn babe, uttering in its cradle its first feeble cries, the church took it to her bosom and motherly embrace. Columbus," so he was from where? Spain. Which makes him a Catholic, "as we have elsewhere expressly shown, sought as the primary fruit of his voyages and labors to open a pathway for the Christian faith." Which faith?
Christian, which means Catholic.
Right. "Into new lands and new seas." So really, Columbus was sent by the Queen and King of Spain,
who were also Catholic,
to actually see how they could bring Catholicism to America.
Yeah.
So it wasn't only about discovering, the new world.
Yeah.
Keeping this thought constantly in view, his first solicitude wherever he disembarked was to plant upon the shore the sacred emblem of the cross. Wherever, like as the Ark of Noah surmounting the overflowing waters, bore the seed of Israel together with the remnants of the human race, even thus did the barks launched by Columbus upon the ocean carry into regions beyond the seas, as well the germs of mighty states as the principles of the Catholic religion.
That's very interesting.
So, in other words, they were planting seeds of Catholicism. They wanted an in.
Yeah.
In fact, religious liberty meant that it was liberty for them as well.
Mhm.
And they took advantage of that.
Yes.
It wasn't just for those that were oppressed by the Catholic Church that had religious liberty, but the Catholics said, well, if you can have religious liberty, so can we.
Well, and this is what a lot of these guys, Francis Bacon, etc.,
Yes.
who went in and seen this massive opportunity.
Mm.
Oh, we have freedom to sort of infiltrate
Mhm.
and do what we need to do. And Francis Bacon is a very fascinating character if you get really in the nitty gritty. But they were able to bring in some of these ideas and try and feed them into the Christian mindset. Well, the Catholics called themselves Christians as well.
Right.
And plant these ideas there because there was freedom to do so.
Correct. And then he continues, for it is sufficiently well known how many of the children of Francis, as well as of Dominic and of Loyola, were accustomed during the 2 following centuries to voyage there for this purpose. So, in other words, these priests of these Franciscan monks, these Dominican monks, and the Jesuits, who are the children of Loyola, were used to going there.
Right.
They were populating the country.
So take a listen to this quote from Pope Gregory XVI. This shameful font of indifferentism gives rise to that absurd and erroneous proposition which claims that liberty of conscience must be maintained for everyone.
Oh, everyone can't have it.
That is a very almost humorous statement with how he states that it's absurd and erroneous for people to have liberty of conscience.
It is ridiculous for him to even say that. And then we have Pope Pius IX. He echoes that, from which totally false idea of social government, they do not fear to foster that erroneous opinion most fatal in its effects on the Catholic Church and the salvation of souls. So in other words, religious liberty is fatal to the Catholic Church.
And this should give us an idea of why they were sending groups like the Jesuits and all these different groups over to America upon its founding. Because if you're watching a nation being formed that's promising religious liberty and saying that everybody has the right to go by their own conscience, that's a bad situation if you don't believe in those things.
Well, that's a death knell to the tyranny of the Catholic Church.
Right.
Because the whole Dark Ages was all about you're not allowed to have your own thought. You're not allowed to have your own opinion. You're not allowed to have your own belief. You're not even allowed to learn to read, and certainly not read the Bible, because then you might find out that what we're saying isn't biblical.
And also, if we read this quote from the Syllabus of Errors, this was a compilation of errors that were termed that by the Catholic Church. It says, it is error to believe that, quote, every man is free to embrace and profess that religion which, guided by the light of reason, he shall consider true.
So that's an error.
Right. So you don't have the authority to do that. To
Right.
think for yourself.
I find this absolutely appalling, shocking, and
Heinous.
and that people don't even give it a second thought.
I know. They think that's in the past. It just doesn't matter anymore. No one reads this stuff.
It's absolutely absurd.
The problem is the Catholic Church has not changed. It hasn't recanted. It hasn't said, all the stuff that we said is ridiculous. The Syllabus of Errors we renounce. No, they have it all in their books. This is still what they believe.
And actually, we're hearing, unfortunately, the same sentiment from the Christian nationalists. We've seen that in the last episode,
right?
That they're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Oh, you're a heretic. We need to deal with you if you don't believe exactly what we think. That's the removal of freedom of religion.
Right.
And here's another quote. The Roman Catholic Church, through its divine prerogatives of being the only true church, must demand the right of freedom for herself alone.
Well, there you have it. She wants freedom for herself.
Exactly. And that's the type of freedom that they believe in. They don't believe in absolute religious freedom.
No.
They do believe in some sort of religious freedom, but it doesn't guarantee absolute, meaning you have the ability to think for yourself and go by what the Bible says. Their type of religious freedom is you have the right to think for yourself as long as it's in harmony with the common good and their teachings.
Right.
If you think outside the box, then you're a heretic.
Right.
It's almost like Ford. He said, you can have any color car you want as long as it's black.
That's right.
Because such a right can only be possessed by truth, never by error.
So in other words, they are the harborers of truth.
Yeah.
Exactly. Who determines what's truth and what's error? Again,
They do. They
exactly,
do.
because they interpret the Bible based upon their tradition and based
Correct.
upon their magisterium. So the Catholic Church is not founded on the Bible and Bible alone. It's on their traditions. And we need to make that point because it's coming from them and not the Bible.
Right.
In a state where the majority of the people are Catholic, the church will require that legal existence be denied to error, and that if religious minorities actively exist, they shall have only a de facto existence without opportunity to spread their beliefs.
So if there are people who disagree, they need to be quiet and lay low.
Yeah.
And they're tolerated, but definitely don't spread your ideas around.
You're not allowed to proselytize, which is what Pope Francis advocated during numerous times during his time as Pope. You're not allowed to proselytize. You're not allowed to try and convince other people of different denominations to join your church or your movement. So calling a people out of Babylon would fall under that. So you're not allowed to do that.
So you're supposed to leave them as they are, look for points of commonality where you can be united with them, and just leave them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now that, of course, not only goes against the Bible, which says teach all nations, right? But it also prevents freedom of speech, because ideas shared change people, and people can make their decisions based on information. And if you can't offer information, offer a different point of view, offer opportunity for dialogue, then you can't change people.
But what if it's anti-Christian? What if you're biased in that way, like Trump's doing in America? Don't you think that would play into what they're saying here?
Well,
it's
for
the
sure.
same thing.
Yeah,
Who determines what's anti-Christian?
Right.
exactly.
So we have to be very aware of what's going on now, and it's not looking good. It's going back in this direction of persecution.
We have this quote from Great Controversy. It says, the pacific tone, meaning pacifist, of Rome in the United States does not imply a change of heart. She is tolerant where she is helpless. She says, Bishop O'Connor, religious liberty is merely endured until the opposite can be carried into effect without peril to the Catholic world. The Archbishop of St. Louis once said, heresy and unbelief are crimes. And in Christian countries, as in Italy and Spain, for instance, where all the people are Catholics, and where the Catholic religion is an essential part of the law of the land, they are punished as other crimes.
Wow. So heresy and unbelief are crimes.
And that's, the only reason, like it's stating, that isn't the case yet in America is because too much damage to Catholicism would take place if they just overtly said, okay, we're going to start persecuting. People would just have an uproar. But if we can slowly bring it in, if we can use these elements, to sort of twist what is happening.
And
Exactly.
I think it's also good to point out that according to the Catholic Church, heresy is defined as thinking for oneself what one chooses to believe.
Good point.
So when they say heresy and unbelief are crimes, if you choose to think for yourself and follow your conscience, follow the Bible, then you're a criminal.
And this isn't a direct attack on Catholics, on individual Catholics.
No.
What we're talking about here is what the Catholic Church as a body, as a whole, as a system teaches and says in their writings. So just in case there's anyone listening, who is a Catholic, you may not even know about some of these things. They may not have even told you about these things. But what we're doing is just reading through those quotes that are directly from Catholics and looking at history.
Yeah.
And in our next quote on religious liberty, it says, "The Catholic Church is a respecter of conscience and of liberty. Nevertheless, when confronted by heresy, has recourse to force, to corporal punishment, and to torture."
It's so funny to me that they would admit that torture is a very real part of their regime to correct heresy.
Yeah. And this isn't a system that is atheistic or any sort of anti-God.
Right.
They don't have that mindset. This is a professed Christian church saying that they have the right to torture people who don't agree with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty horrible.
That's not Christian.
No. No.
And we continue here. This is Pope Pius X. That the state must be separated from the church is a thesis absolutely false, a most pernicious error. And we read this in the last episode. It limits the action of the state to the pursuit of public prosperity during this life only. It follows that the civil power must not only place no obstacle in the way of this conquest, but must aid us in effecting it.
So the state is not only not allowed to be neutral or even to prevent them from setting up their plans, but the state is supposed to help them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What we're doing in showing these quotes is just showing the two positions, because you have America being founded on religious liberty, freedom of conscience, separation of church and state. And then you have the Catholics over here who have the complete opposite mindset.
Correct.
Who want the unification of church and state. So you can see how these two ideologies would come to a head in the foundation of America. That's all we're establishing right now.
And especially when they said, Columbus is going over there to spread the Catholic religion, all these other people, and, Loyola and, or the children of Loyola, there's a specific purpose. And it's not to keep the separation of church and state and to have religious freedom in America. That is not the idea.
Definitely not.
Then it continues, remove the agreement between church and state, and the result will be disputes, large disputes. It will become more difficult to see where the truth lies, and great confusion is certain to rise. That's their opinion. Hence, the Roman pontiffs have never ceased, as circumstances required, to refute and condemn the doctrine of separation of church and state. This is a heresy to them. And we'll continue here. The effect of which is to place the church under the domination of the civil power. It has been a source of bitter grief to us to see the state thus encroached on matters which are within the exclusive jurisdiction of the church.
So we saw in the last episodes about Christian nationalism and how they want to bring the church and the state together. And they don't believe in the separation of church and state. Well, Catholicism also does not believe in the separation of church and state. So as we can see from these quotes, and there is also a group of people in Catholicism that's also pushing for this removal of that separation and a joining of church and state. It's called Catholic integralism. So we have a counterpart in Protestantism and we have a counterpart in Catholicism, all pushing for the same agenda. And of course, in America, we saw Catholics and Protestants and all religions basically mixed together, pushing for the agenda, and that is going right now in America, and they're happily together. So we can see that they've merged. The daughters of the Catholic Church, the mother, are returning to the mother. They are working with the mother, and they are instituting the mother's principles and the mother's ways.
The daughters, according to the Catholic Church, have strayed.
Right.
But they're going to come back.
They are coming back.
They're going to re-embody in themselves, because they are the daughters,
Right.
the whole image of what the mother is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we have this quote from George Mason: that religion, or the duty which we owe to our Creator and the manner of just discharging it, can be directed only by reason and conviction, not by force or violence. And therefore that all men should enjoy the fullest toleration in the exercise of religion according to the dictates of conscience, unpunished and unrestrained by the magistrate.
That was the founding principles of America.
Exactly. And that is, again, opposed to the Catholic view, which is why you had this battle, if you will, for America coming over at its founding.
Exactly. Now, here we have a quote from James Madison to Edward Livingston in 1822. Notwithstanding the general progress made within the 2 last centuries in favor of this branch of liberty and the full establishment of it, in some parts of our country there remains in others a strong bias towards the old error, that without some sort of alliance or coalition between government and religion, neither can be duly supported. So he's saying,
yeah, that's very fascinating.
yeah, that there was people who could not get rid of the idea of church and state has to be together.
They left that system, but they thought it probably just that it was implemented poorly.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't get that this was like the founding problem.
Right. And that was what part of the reason why there was some intolerance and bigotry shown even by those people who came from all that persecution. They established little colonies that then treated people in similar ways that the Catholic Church treated. It was hard to get it out of their system. They'd been in it for already so long.
Yeah.
Such indeed is the tendency to such a coalition, and such its corrupting influence on both the parties, that the danger cannot be too carefully guarded against. Every new and successful example, therefore, of a perfect separation between ecclesiastical and civil matters is of importance.
Wow.
So here we see those people, remember in the last episode, we're saying there's no such thing. Separation of church and state was never in the Constitution, but it's clearly in the intent of these people who created those things.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. They're not quoting anyone.
No.
They're just making statements,
Right.
That's what they meant.
Yeah.
That's a great way to explain it. And not actually reading what these same guys were actually saying.
Right. They're not providing evidence. They're just calling it junk, but they're not actually showing. And if they were to look at it, they'd see this. It was the belief of all sects at one time that the establishment of religion by law was right and necessary, that the true religion ought to be established in exclusion of all others, and that the only question to be decided was, which was the true religion?
That's a very important question.
It was.
It all just goes back to who determines what factor? How do we determine what is true and false? If we went back to the Bible, fine, then we wouldn't have a problem with that. But the problem is there's so many different interpretations out there. There's so many different ideas, so many different errors that you can't do it because there's going to be conflict and persecution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, James Madison wrote to Jasper Adams in 1833, I must admit, moreover, that it may not be easy in every possible case to trace the line of separation between the rights of religion and the civil authority with such distinctness as to avoid collisions and doubts on unessential points. This tendency to a usurpation on one side or the other. And then he talks about how basically it's either one or the other that's going to take over.
And he's acknowledging that it's a little complicated.
It is.
To have this separation. But if you don't, one is going to usurp the other at some point in time. It's just inevitable, right? If you're playing a game of chess, someone's going to win at some point.
Right. And as you pointed out last episode, if you're playing a game and you don't want to be influenced by the other person, then don't play the game.
Yeah.
Because what that person does in the game is going to influence your decisions, your moves, and have an influence.
And here we have just further evidence. We really want to nail this down because people are going to say, well, that's this person or that's that person. This was the predominant view. This is what
Okay.
America was founded on. This is what they taught. And for many different people, for instance, James Madison here, Congress should not establish a religion and enforce the legal observation of it by law, nor compel men to worship God in any manner contrary to their conscience. John Adams, government has no right to hurt a hair of the head of an atheist for his opinions. Let him have a care of his practices.
So in other words,
Yep.
you can mandate civil laws, but not moral laws.
Exactly. The government cannot legislate morality. That's
Mhm.
off limits to the civil power. Thomas Jefferson, I am for freedom of religion and against all maneuvers to bring about a legal ascendancy of one sect over another. This is again Thomas Jefferson, the subject of religion, a subject on which I have ever been most scrupulously reserved. I have considered it as a matter between every man and his Maker, in which no other, and far less the public, had a right to intermeddle. And this is James Monroe. The religion then of every man must be left to the conviction and conscience of every man, and it is the right of every man to exercise it as these may dictate.
So it shows that there were a lot of voices who thought these things. They put it in writings, they put it in letters, and it is simply not true that separation of church and state was not what was intended.
They're coming over here because they had that form of government in Europe.
Right.
The church was controlling the state.
Right.
They came over here to escape that persecution. They wouldn't want to establish the same thing over here because then they have nowhere to run.
Exactly. And as we pointed out last time, the church was controlling the kings, not the kings controlling the church.
Yes.
In fact, it was kings that were excommunicated by the church, and thereby all the citizens in that country were under interdict or under basically denial of the sacraments and not able to get married, not able to have a Christian funeral. And so it was a very big problem if the king angered the Pope. And once I think that there was a king, I think it was Henry, who angered the Pope so much and placed his entire country under interdict that he had to go visit the Pope, and the Pope made him stand for 3 days barefoot in the snow. So there was definitely no kingly power.
Yeah.
It was papal power all the way.
And unfortunately, it doesn't take a lot of time for people to forget history.
Yes.
It's a very short amount of time, and it's getting shorter as people have TikTok brain. It's shorter and shorter and shorter. This was not that long ago that America was founded, but it's been long enough that people don't know the significance. They don't know their history. They don't read anymore. They Google and Facebook and everything and TikTok, everything. And the only things they know is what influencers say
Yes.
about the history.
Right.
Not quote, not read, not show, not share.
Right.
Just their version and their interpretation of it.
Well, one thing I heard once someone say was that, those people who had anti-Catholic sentiments in the beginning of America, well, that was just their thing. That was society. That was basically, it was false, and it was discrimination, a discriminatory attitude that people had. And they completely failed to understand that there was a very good reason for why people were so afraid. They were afraid to going back to that.
People don't realize that right now, what Catholicism looks like is not what Catholicism is.
Exactly.
And that's the problem. And I have family that are Catholic, and, it's not the individuals. Like we're saying, we're talking about a system. We're talking about a system that has been around for well over 1,000 years. And they have perfected the art of infiltration, of, a coup, of lying low, and they look a certain way, but the fundamental principles of the religion is control and
It is.
control of all, and to punish all heretics.
Yeah.
And just because they can't play that out right now is the only reason it's not happening, not because they've changed their view. And a lot of Catholics don't know that.
Right.
They enjoy all the other parts of being a Catholic
Mhm.
and don't know that's the real goal of
Mhm.
Catholicism, is to be the worldwide dominating power over all state, religion, all parts of life, that no one should have any freedom outside of believing. You have freedom to believe in Catholicism.
Right.
And I think it was Winston Churchill that said, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And that's actually what we're seeing today, like we talked about in past episodes. We're going back to this church and state union. How did we get there? Well, obviously we've forgotten
Yeah.
something.
That's why.
And that's why we're giving these videos and things like that, trying to wake people up. This is where we're heading, and we can't forget
No.
the past. We can't forget history. It's going to happen again.
Yeah.
Right.
We have another quote here from James Madison. In the papal system, government and religion are in a manner consolidated. And that is found to be the worst of governments. I mean, that's pretty easy to see just through history.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says, the highlighted part, very little toleration of others. I would change that to no toleration of others.
Mm-hmm. And then we have this quote from Samuel Adams. And I want to spend a little bit of time on this one because this is very important
Yes.
that we understand. He says, in regard to religion, mutual toleration in the different professions thereof is what all good and candid minds in all ages have ever practiced. The only sects which he thinks ought to be, and which by all wise laws are excluded from such toleration, are those who teach doctrines subversive to the civil government under which they live.
So here we see that, and it makes sense. If there's somebody who's working against the government or trying to tear down the government, they should be excluded from being tolerated, right? So he's saying we should be tolerant of everybody, of their opinions, of their religion, except those who are trying to tear down the government and try to tear down the country,
Right.
and the principles upon which it's founded. That makes good sense.
Here, reading on, it says the Roman Catholics or papists are excluded.
Aha.
So they're not in that group of religious liberty because they put the Pope, as he's going to mention here, above the state power.
So he's saying these ones are the ones that should be excluded from the toleration.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So some people get this idea of the United States was founded on religious liberty for everyone, and that would include Roman Catholics. The problem is that Roman Catholics are excluded from this because they put the Pope above the state, and they want to have this church and state structure. And according to Samuel Adams, that excludes them from this group of religious liberty.
Well, because you can only have an agreement of freedom to another person who agrees
With
in freedom.
Exactly.
Right? If we're going to play a game and we all read the rules, and Jacob says, I'm totally good with this game, but I actually want to play by these rules.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to play? And he's like, you guys play your rules, I'll play my rules. And on my rules, I get 10 times the money when I pass go. I get, all of these things. He's going to win every time.
Right.
Because he actually doesn't agree to let us all have our fair space.
And that's the same with religious liberty. So if religious liberty is for everyone, it's for everyone who believes in religious liberty.
Exactly.
And Catholics don't believe in religious liberty except for themselves.
So they can't be
So then they can't
included
be
in that.
included because they don't actually believe in religious liberty for others. That is the system, of course.
Yeah.
Doesn't believe in it.
And not just that they don't believe in it. The problem is they are a nation unto themselves.
Right.
So their nation is expansionist. Their nation is one that their whole premise is to control all other nations.
Right.
So that's not a friendly, way to be under the same sort of freedom government. It just doesn't work that way.
Right. The Roman Catholics or Papists are excluded by reasons of such doctrines as these: that princes excommunicated may be deposed, and those that they call heretics may be destroyed without mercy, besides their recognizing the Pope in so absolute a manner, in subversion of government, by introducing as far as possible into the states under whose protection they enjoy life, liberty, and property, that solecism in politics, empire within an empire, leading directly to the worst anarchy and confusion, civil discord, war, and bloodshed.
Now that's a big statement, and it sounds pretty bad.
And that's the whole thing. That's why the people had to leave Europe, because there was no freedom of religion. They couldn't read the Bible as it was written.
Right.
They couldn't believe just the Bible. They had to go with tradition, or else they would be disposed of. They would be removed. They would be all the things
destroyed
that were
without mercy.
Destroyed without mercy, right? And you can't have freedom to a person who is against freedom.
Right.
I mean, we can be free here, but the reason serial killers are not allowed to be free is because they don't believe in freedom of others to control their own destiny. They control everyone's destiny. And that is a similar sentiment, that the Catholic Church actually believes that you can destroy individuals if they don't believe that the Pope is, recognizing the Pope in so absolute manner.
Well, unfortunately, the Christian nationalists that we saw, in the last episode, also believe that it's okay to take away property, jail, and even guillotine people who don't agree with them. So this is a very scary sentiment that's coming into America, and it's stemming from actually this very system, the Catholic system. And at the next episode, we're going to be looking more into this, because this quote by Samuel Adams said that this mentality also leads to anarchy, confusion, civil discord, war, bloodshed, and we could speak for hours about the civil discord, war, and bloodshed that the Jesuits, which are a secret group of Catholics, have fomented in nations. They've been even banned from nations. Yeah. And we are going to cover some of this in the future Truth Matters episodes.
And this is the full image of the beast structure being implemented. And it's not going to be specifically the Catholics doing it.
Right.
But they have so influenced the daughters or the other Protestant churches to do exactly what the papacy did for so long. And they're going to do it again and repeat that in America. And people need to be pushing against this, not pushing against God, not pushing against Christianity, pushing against this combination of church and state, where the state has influence over church, church has influence over state, because it's just a cycle. You can't have one without the other. So we need to be very aware, and we need to try and, with whatever efforts we can, without being, belligerent, pushing this back and holding this back, because this is not a godly attribute. And we read at the start that God had intended that America would stay free for all.
Yes. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and that you will join us again at the next episode, where we will dive deeper into this discussion. Thank you for joining us.